It started quietly. One or two people in the village mentioning strange dreams over morning coffee. Nothing terrifying, nothing surreal. Just a field, a path, a single standing stone beneath a black sky. They described it like déjà vu, unsettling only because of how familiar it felt. Then others began to speak up. Teachers, shopkeepers, children. They all started having the same dream. And not just the same setting, but the same sequence, the same footsteps along the same path, the same humming noise in the air, low and steady, like distant machinery buried beneath the ground. At first, it became a novelty, something to laugh about. "We all dreamt the same thing again," they'd say. Local journalists wrote it off as collective suggestion, a curious but harmless oddity. But the dreams didn't stop. They changed, slowly. Night after night, something was being added. One week, the standing stone was joined by walls. The next, windows. Then doors with no handles. Lights that didn't flicker. A hallway with no end. And every villager reported these changes at the same time, as if their minds were part of a shared blueprint. As if the dream was building itself through them. Scientists were brought in. Sleep researchers, cultural psychologists. None of them could explain how dozens of unrelated people, all with different backgrounds, histories, and beliefs, could share identical sequences down to the placement of objects and specific atmospheric details. They hooked up sensors, ran sleep studies, monitored brainwaves. What they found disturbed them even more. During certain phases of sleep, the villagers' neurological patterns began to sync. Their brain activity pulsed in a collective rhythm, as if something was coordinating them. One outsider described the place as peaceful but wrong, like stepping into a town rehearsing for a performance you weren't allowed to see. The smiles didn't quite reach the eyes. Conversations trailed off at the same moments. And at night, all the lights went out at once. The strangest part? No one in the village seemed alarmed. Not anymore. They accepted the dreams the way people accept seasons, as part of the cycle, as something inevitable, something they were born into, something they would finish. Welcome to Tales from the Forbidden Library, where the line between memory and prophecy is thin, and the dream you share might not be yours at all. At first, the dreams were simple. A field of short, dry grass beneath a starless sky. No wind, no sound. Just a standing stone in the center. Tall, featureless, and cold to the touch. The villagers would approach it in the same way every night. They wouldn't speak in the dream. They never needed to. The silence was part of it. A silence so deep, it felt designed. Then came the sound, a low hum, pulsing beneath the earth like something stirring far below. It had rhythm, but no melody. More vibration than noise. The kind of sound that isn't heard with the ears, but felt in the bones. That's when people began waking with nosebleeds. Night sweats. Unexplained bruises on the bottoms of their feet, as if they'd been walking in their sleep. The dreams changed together. One night the stone split, revealing a staircase that spiraled downward. Everyone saw it at once. Everyone took the first step. And when they woke the next morning, they found themselves exhausted, like they'd walked miles. Their legs ached. Their shoes, though unworn, were coated in fine dust. The village's doctor began to log the shared symptoms. Muscle fatigue, heightened cortisol, echoed sleep cycles. It wasn't psychosomatic. These people were living a second life in their sleep. And whatever they were doing there, it was taking a toll. Yet none of them wanted it to stop. That was the most disturbing part. As the dreams evolved, so did the architecture. What began as a field became a corridor, then a chamber, then a hallway filled with smooth black panels that pulsed softly with dim light. Some described it as a bunker. Others said it felt more like a temple, one still under construction. The details varied, but the layout always matched. They didn't talk about it as a fantasy. They spoke about it like a duty. "We're nearly done with the north wing. The doors will be ready soon. We saw the circle last night. It's almost time." They didn't question the dream. They contributed to it. They were building something, together. Outsiders who spent a single night in the village reported fragments of the same dream, not the full structure, just glimpses. A doorway, a flicker of the humming, a wall of symbols they couldn't understand. And once they left, the dreams stopped, like they'd only been allowed a preview, a taste. The villagers, however, kept dreaming, and the structure kept growing. But none of them could explain what it was. There were no blueprints, no schematics, and yet everyone knew what came next. They'd wake with sketches in the margins of notebooks, dirt under their fingernails, symbols drawn absent-mindedly on their arms in pen. Each addition in the dream left a residue in waking life. Some began to question if they were dreaming at all, because the more they built, the more familiar it felt. Not like they were imagining something new, but remembering something they'd built before. The first outsider to find it was a cartographer, a researcher mapping small, unmarked settlements. He wasn't looking for anything unusual. The village itself wasn't even on the main registry, just a name passed around by older locals and handwritten on the corner of a pre-war map. When he arrived, he found the village quiet, isolated, and oddly synchronized. The people spoke gently. Their movements felt rehearsed, and when he asked about roads or boundaries, they offered only polite smiles. But it wasn't until he wandered off the marked paths that he found it. Nestled behind a row of trees, hidden from the main road, was a structure that shouldn't have existed. Low to the ground, black stone, seamless walls. It didn't match the architecture of the area or anywhere else. It looked unfinished, not abandoned, not ancient, still being shaped, still forming. There were no windows, no signs of entry, no markings on the surface. But when he pressed his hand against the side, he said it vibrated, just slightly. A slow, deep hum that resonated through his fingertips and into his chest. It matched the pulse he later described hearing in his dreams. Dreams that started the night he left the village. He returned a week later with cameras and equipment, but the structure was gone, not moved, gone. The grass was undisturbed, the trees untouched. He retraced his steps, certain he hadn't imagined it. But where there had once been a wall of cold black stone, there was now only air and silence. Others came, researchers, paranormal investigators, skeptics. Some saw glimpses, a corner of dark geometry flickering between trees. Others saw nothing. But every time someone stayed overnight in the village, they reported the same dream that night. Standing in a hallway underground, watching villagers pass silently with tools in hand. The most disturbing account came from a woman who lived in the area 30 years prior. She remembered dreams like those when she was young, before she left. Dreams she'd forgotten until she saw photos of the village online. The shapes, the symbols, the hum. It had all returned. She hadn't stepped foot there in decades. But the moment she remembered, the dreams resumed. As the weeks went on, the villagers stopped speaking about the dreams altogether. Not out of secrecy, but because they no longer needed to. Their waking lives began to mirror their sleeping ones. Gardening gave way to excavation. Tools disappeared from sheds. Circles of disturbed earth began to appear in empty fields, always in the same patterns, always without explanation. It was as if the structure in their dreams had begun to bleed into reality. Not metaphorically, literally. The village was changing to match what they saw while they slept. One brick at a time, one shadow deeper each day. And the worst part? The villagers didn't seem to notice. It began with small things, barely noticeable at first. Someone would dig a trench in their backyard and forget why. A child would trace circles into the dirt with perfect symmetry, patterns far too complex for play. A farmer moved his fence line 3 meters without realizing it, reshaping his land to match a layout no one else could see. They weren't building walls or homes or sheds. They were creating outlines, shapes in the soil, carved paths, piles of stones stacked and arranged without reason. But when seen from above, a pattern started to form. Something geometric, something deliberate. It wasn't just building, it was replication. They were bringing the dream into the waking world. And it wasn't just a few of them. The entire village was participating, consciously or not. People began waking with soil under their nails, their feet sore from walking. Tools would vanish from garages only to reappear in strange places. Beside beds, beneath porches, stuck into tree trunks like they'd been used and forgotten. No one claimed responsibility. No one thought it was strange. Conversations grew shorter. Eye contact lingered too long. The villagers no longer joked about the dreams or questioned their odd habits. They'd simply smile and say, "Almost done." When asked what they meant, they'd repeat the phrase, not mechanically, but reverently, like something sacred was nearly complete. Visitors were no longer welcome. Outsiders who stayed too long felt an unbearable pressure, like the land itself didn't want them there. Some heard faint humming in the woods. Others woke in the night with the image of a long hallway in their mind, pulsing with soft light. One man reported dreaming of digging, his own hands clawing through wet earth, searching for a door he didn't want to find. By now, the shape of the village had changed entirely. Fields that once grew crops now sat barren, flattened, and marked with symbols. Homes were subtly rearranged, walls knocked down, rooms abandoned. Everything now seemed to orbit a central area no one talked about. A space left empty, reserved. No one worked jobs anymore. Shops were closed, but no one seemed to need food or money. Their days were spent walking routes through the village, like ants following a path only they could see. And at night, the lights dimmed in unison, the dreams continued, and the sound of digging echoed beneath the silence. A drone flight over the area revealed something terrifying. Beneath the village, carved shallowly into the land, was the same blueprint described in the dreams. A near-complete map of something massive, something buried. Not a building, not a temple. Something older, something waiting. They weren't just building for themselves anymore. They were preparing something to be entered. No one knows who said it first. It's almost finished. But soon every villager was repeating it, with the same soft tone, the same calm certainty. Not as a question, as a fact. Like something had already told them. Like the countdown had already begun. People stopped dreaming altogether. Not because they didn't sleep, but because there was nothing left to build. The structure, whatever it was, had been completed. Not in their minds, not in the fields, but somewhere between. A place that no longer belonged to dreams or waking. A third state. And once it was finished, the villagers began to change again. Some stopped speaking. Entire days passed with no conversation, just movement, just quiet. A strange unity fell over the town, one that felt too synchronized to be natural. It was as if they were listening for something, waiting for a signal, or for something inside the completed structure to stir. The surrounding towns began to notice. Deliveries went unclaimed. Roads were left to overgrow. People who entered the village, neighbors, relatives, reporters, either turned back from the oppressive stillness or stayed longer than intended and forgot why they came. One man parked outside the town limits and left his car running for 4 hours, staring ahead with empty eyes. Eventually, Authorities stepped in, but by then, it was too late. What they found was a place out of sync with the rest of the world, a map without roads, a village that felt more like a stage, and in the center, beneath the old square, they found a hatch, circular, seamless, locked from the inside. No one could explain the structure's origin. No records, no permits, no tools nearby. It was as if it had always been there, waiting to be remembered. And when they opened it, if they opened it, no one ever said what they found. Only that the village was declared off-limits, and the official reports went missing. To this day, strange dreams still surface in nearby towns. A hum beneath the soil, a dark hallway, an unfinished door, and always a sense that someone is waiting just out of sight, watching, not from malice, but from design, as if we're next, as if our dreams are being assessed. Because here's the most terrifying idea of all. What if the village wasn't dreaming the same thing? What if the dream was using them to finish itself? If this story stirred something in your memory, tell me what you've dreamed. Like the video, subscribe to the channel, and share it with someone who talks in their sleep. Because when the dream finishes building itself, it might come looking for you next.